The widow loved him in silence for 20 years, until he returned and gave her a family and a home. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The wind pressed hard against the small stone cottage on the hill, carrying the grey scent of coal and cold. Inside, Mary Collins stitched by the dim light of a single lamp, her fingers moving with quiet precision over a worn piece of fabric. The sound of the needle filled the silence. It was the sound of her life, measured, patient, endless. She paused only to glance toward the window, where the world was fading into snow and dusk. Thomas had not come home yet from the forge. He was 17 now, taller than she had expected him to grow, with his father's stubborn jaw and a gentleness that wasn't his father's at all. Mary smiled faintly, folded the fabric, and set it aside. Her hands were stiff from years of sewing. Every night ended this way. Work finished, a lamp burning low, and her eyes drifting toward the horizon that hid the road from the old Blackwood estate. No one lived there anymore. The manor stood silent on the opposite ridge. A great house turned into a ghost. She sometimes thought she heard it breathing in the wind. That house had once been her whole world, before war, before silence, before she learned what it meant to wait for someone who would never return. When the latch clicked, she looked up quickly. It was only Thomas, his cheeks flushed with cold. "They kept me late," he said, hanging his coat near the fire. "Mr. Avery's mare threw a shoe again." She nodded. "You should eat." He sat, wolfed down the stew she'd kept warm, and talked about the forge, the horses, and the blacksmith's bad temper. She listened, answering softly, her eyes on his face. He had no idea how much of her heart was built around him, how many years of sorrow had turned into his laughter. When he went to bed, the house fell quiet again. Outside, the wind rose. Mary added wood to the fire and sat near it, sewing once more. Her thoughts wandered, as they always did, back to the memory that had shaped everything. A young man on a horse, promising, "I'll come back for you, Mary. Wait for me." She had been 19. The world had been full of light then. A sudden knock made her jump. It came again, firm, uneven. No one ever came this far up the hill at night. She stood, the needle still between her fingers, and looked toward the door. For a heartbeat, she thought it must be Thomas forgetting something, but the voice that followed was not his. "Please," it said, rough and low. "I need shelter." Her breath caught. She hesitated, then opened the door halfway. The wind burst in, carrying snow and the figure of a man hunched against it. He looked enormous in the doorway, a traveler wrapped in a torn coat, his boots heavy with mud. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "The road. There was a storm coming. I saw the light." Mary stepped back. "Come in then, quickly." He entered, dripping melted snow onto the floor. When he pushed back his hood, she saw a face marked by years, deep lines, tired eyes, a faint scar along his jaw. But beneath the weariness, there was something hauntingly familiar. She stared, trying to place him, but memory was cruel. It reached for what it feared to find. He looked around the small room. "You live alone?" "My son and I," she said quietly. "You'll have to make do with simple comfort. The fire is small, but it's warm. Warm is enough." She poured him tea, watching his trembling hands wrap around the cup. His clothes were travel-worn, but not poor. The way he carried himself, upright even in exhaustion, spoke of a man raised to command, not to beg. After a long silence, he said, "It's strange, I remember this valley, the sound of the wind here, it hasn't changed." Mary froze. "You know Yorkshire, then?" He nodded. "I grew up here." His eyes lifted to hers. "Do you remember the Blackwood estate?" Her throat tightened. "Everyone does. The house still stands." He smiled faintly, but there was no joy in it. "I used to live there. Long ago." Something in her chest gave way. She set the teapot down before she could drop it. "What did you say your name was?" "I didn't," he replied softly. Then he looked at her fully, the firelight catching his eyes. Grey, storm-worn eyes she had once known better than her own. "Mary," he whispered, as if testing the word. Her knees went weak. "Edward." The cup slipped from her fingers and shattered. He rose instantly. "Forgive me. I didn't mean to frighten you." She shook her head, unable to speak. The years rushed back in a wave. The summer afternoons in the orchard, his laughter, the stolen letter that never came, the long nights praying for news that never arrived. I thought you were dead, she managed at last. I nearly was, he said, many times. He told her little, only that war and exile had swallowed him, that he'd returned now to settle his father's affairs. The rest he left unsaid. His voice carried the sound of regret, too deep for words. Mary moved to the window. The storm was thick outside. Snow swept sideways across the fields. You can stay the night, she said finally. There's a cot by the fire. Thank you. She fetched blankets while he removed his boots. The sight of his hands, scarred, stronger than before, made her chest ache. Time had changed him, but not completely. Somewhere behind the weariness lived the man she had loved. When she returned, he was studying the small room. You've made a good home, he said. It feels safe, she didn't answer. The word safe meant little to her. Nothing in her life had ever truly been that. The clock ticked. The fire crackled. He sat, she stood, and 20 years of silence hung between them. Finally he asked, Did you ever marry, Mary? She hesitated. Yes. He swallowed hard. I see. He died some years ago, she added, her tone calm, almost distant. I'm sorry. For what? For the years that passed, or for not being among them? He flinched. For both. The words left them suspended in a fragile peace. She turned toward the small room where Thomas slept. My son doesn't wake easily. You'll not disturb him. He nodded. You have a son. Yes. Something unreadable crossed his face. He's lucky to have you. She studied him, sensing the unspoken question behind his words. He has his father's name, she said, as if to close the subject. Edward looked away, his jaw tightening. Of course. Mary knelt by the hearth to add more wood. It's strange, she murmured. After so long I imagined I'd forgotten your voice, but I didn't. He watched her hands. I imagined you'd hate me. I tried, she said simply. It didn't last. The storm deepened outside. The wind howled like an old ghost, pushing snow against the windows. She rose, brushing her skirt. You should rest. You look exhausted. I will, he said. But may I ask one thing? She hesitated. What is it? When you looked at me just now, was it anger or kindness? Neither, she said. It was memory. He nodded slowly, as though he understood too well. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he added, I shouldn't have come here. You're here now, she replied, and the road's too dangerous to ride in this weather. Stay till morning. After that, the hill will let you go. He smiled faintly. The hill and you, both as unkind as ever. Her lips curved despite herself. Go to sleep, Edward. She left him by the fire and walked down the narrow hallway. The floor creaked under her feet. In Thomas's room, the boy slept deeply, one hand over his chest. She watched him for a long moment, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. When she turned, she saw Edward's shadow against the flicker of the firelight in the next room. She closed the door gently and leaned her back against it. Her hands trembled. It felt impossible that he was truly there. Flesh and breath, his voice filling the same air she breathed. But in her heart, confusion spread like warmth and pain combined. Hours later, when the storm eased, she found herself unable to sleep. She walked to the main room again. Edward was awake, sitting by the dying fire. You should rest, she said quietly. He looked up. So should you. They both smiled, tired, uncertain smiles that belonged to people who had already lived too much life. I keep wondering, he said, staring into the embers, how many times you waited at that window. I imagined you forgot me after the first winter. Every morning, she said, almost to herself, I told myself you'd come back. And every night I told myself you wouldn't. He looked at her as if the years vanished. If I could undo it, you can't. No, he agreed softly, but I can tell you the truth. The truth is, you left, she said. Nothing changes that. He bowed his head. You're right. And yet, here I am. Silence again. The kind of silence that holds more than words. After a moment, she said, You'll leave at dawn. Yes. Where will you go? To the estate, he said. What's left of it? I have matters to settle. My father's death left things undone. Mary turned away. Then that's where you belong. I don't know where I belong anymore. His voice was soft, almost broken. Something in it made her chest ache again. She gathered her shawl and whispered, "Good night, Edward." He didn't answer, only watched her walk away. When she reached her door, she heard him say quietly, "I never stopped thinking of you." She stopped, but didn't turn. "Go to sleep." The firelight flickered, and the house fell still again. In the half-darkness of her room, she lay awake, listening to the sound of the wind against the windows and the faint rhythm of another person's breathing in the next room. It had been so long since the house had held more than her and her son. She told herself it was only for one night. But when morning came, the storm had left the valley white and silent. Edward was still asleep by the fire, his face turned toward the light, as if the years had finally stopped chasing him. Thomas came running from his room, rubbing his eyes. "Mother, there's someone here." "Yes," she said quickly. "He was caught in the storm. Let him rest." Thomas peered at the stranger curiously. "He looks like someone I've seen before." Mary froze. "Where?" "I don't know," the boy said, shrugging. "Maybe in town, or in one of those old paintings at the manor. The ones no one's allowed to see." Edward stirred, waking slowly. His eyes met the boy's. Thomas grinned. "Morning, sir." Edward smiled faintly. "Morning." Mary busied herself at the stove, trying not to look at either of them. Her heart was hammering too fast. Thomas leaned closer, studying him. "You're not from around here, are you?" Edward shook his head. "Not anymore." The boy tilted his head. "How do you know my mother?" Edward's gaze shifted to Mary. For a long moment neither spoke. Then, very softly, he said, "We knew each other a long time ago." Thomas nodded, satisfied with the mystery. "Mother knows everyone," he said proudly, grabbing a slice of bread. Mary tried to smile. "Eat your breakfast." As Thomas sat at the table, Edward rose slowly, stretching stiff limbs. He moved toward the door, then hesitated. "Mary," she turned. His voice was quiet but certain, carrying all the weight of years lost. "Is he your son?" Mary didn't answer right away. Her hands tightened around the edge of the table, and for a moment, the only sound was the pop of the fire. Thomas glanced between them, confused by the tension that filled the room. Edward's question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. "Yes," Mary said finally, her voice even. "He's my son." Edward nodded, though his eyes didn't leave hers. "Of course." Thomas looked up. "Why are you asking that?" Edward smiled faintly. "Curiosity. You look like a good young man." The boy shrugged and went back to his breakfast, but Mary could feel Edward's gaze on her. He wanted to ask more, but he didn't. There were too many years between them, too much unsaid. After breakfast, Thomas left for the forge. As soon as the door closed, Edward spoke quietly. "He's not like the man you married, is he?" Mary stiffened. "You remember too much for someone who's been gone 20 years. "I remember everything," he said. "I remember the day you told me you'd never love anyone else, and I remember the letter I sent you, promising to return." Her voice was sharp. "You promised many things." He winced. "My father stopped the letters. I wrote again and again. He made sure you'd never receive them. I didn't know until much later." Mary folded her arms. "And when you found out? Did you come back?" "I couldn't," he said. "He sent me to the colonies. I was under his command until the end." She looked at him with disbelief. "And now you expect me to believe that after all this time?" "No," he said quietly. "I expect nothing. I came here to see for myself what remained." Mary turned away, staring out the window where snow still covered the hills. "What remains?" she repeated softly. "Only what you left behind." Edward stepped closer but didn't touch her. "You think I don't see how much I've lost? How much you've lost?" "I don't need your pity, Edward." "It's not pity, it's guilt." She faced him then, her eyes hard. "Then live with it. You earned it." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Edward sighed and moved toward the fire. "The war changes a man. I thought of this place every night, of you, of what I'd ruined. But you—" He stopped, shaking his head. "You've built something stronger than I ever could have given you." Mary ignored the ache his words stirred. "You said you came to settle your father's affairs. What kind of affairs bring you to my door?" "There are few who still remember me," he said. "Fewer who'd open their doors. I needed somewhere to start." "This is no place to start," she replied. "It's a place to finish what's already ended." He smiled faintly. "You still talk like that." "Quietly. but every word cuts. She picked up her sewing to hide her trembling hands. "You're welcome to the fire, but don't mistake kindness for forgiveness. I wouldn't dare." The day passed in silence. Edward helped chop wood without being asked. He moved carefully as if afraid to take up too much space. When Thomas returned, the boy watched him with curiosity, asking questions about the war, the cities, the ships. Edward answered with patience, never speaking of violence, only of places and faces long gone. That evening, Thomas leaned toward his mother. "He's kind, isn't he?" Mary nodded. "He's a guest." The boy smiled. "He doesn't act like one." When Thomas went to bed, Edward sat near the fire again. "He's bright," he said softly. "You've done well, Mary." "I did what I had to," she said. "There's no praise in survival." He nodded, staring into the flames. "Do you ever wonder how it might have been?" "No," she said too quickly. "Wondering doesn't change what is." "I used to think the same," he said. "Then I stopped trying to forget." She gave him a sharp look. "Don't speak to me of forgetting. I had to live with every day you were gone, every whisper, every door closed in my face after you left. I didn't know. You should have," she said. "If you had truly meant to come back, nothing could have stopped you." His expression darkened. "You think I didn't try? I think you didn't fight hard enough." He leaned forward, his voice low. "There are things you don't understand. Promises I made, debts I couldn't break. My father—" "Your father is dead," she interrupted. "Let him rest. The damage was done long before his grave was dug." He flinched, but didn't argue. The fire crackled between them, loud and alive. Finally, he said, "I came here because I needed a place that felt real again. The estate is empty. The house echoes with ghosts. But here, there's warmth. There's life." Mary's tone softened, despite herself. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why?" "Because you'll leave again," she said. "And I can't watch you go twice." He stared at her for a long moment. "Then tell me to leave now." She looked away. "You'll stay until the weather clears." A quiet smile touched his lips. "That's mercy enough." Days passed like that. Short, grey days with little light. Edward helped repair the fence, carried water, fixed the roof where snow had weighed it down. The villagers began to whisper. A stranger at Mary Collins's cottage was a story that spread fast in the small valley. When Mary went to town for supplies, Mrs. Graham, the grocer's wife, stopped her near the counter. "I heard you've got company," she said, her tone sweet but sharp. "A gentleman, no less. Not many widows entertain travelers, Mary." Mary kept her eyes on the coins in her hand. "He was caught in the storm. It's only for a few days." Mrs. Graham leaned closer. "They say he's a Blackwood. Is it true?" Mary froze. "People say many things." "Well," Mrs. Graham said with a knowing smile, "it would be a fine story if the lady from the cottage took in the air of the manor. Finer still if the boy of hers has grey eyes like his." The coins clattered onto the counter. "That's enough," Mary said quietly. "Keep the change." She left without looking back. When she returned home, Edward was outside, mending the gate. "You shouldn't be doing that," she said, her voice still tight with anger. He looked up. "The hinges were rusted. It won't take long." "I mean, you shouldn't be seen doing it. The village talks." "They always did," he said. "Why should that matter now?" "Because I live here," she said. "I have to keep my name clean." He wiped his hands. "And mine is already dirty, so it balances out." She didn't smile. "You don't understand. People like me don't get to survive rumors." Edward walked closer. "Then let them talk. What can they take from you that hasn't already been taken?" She looked up at him, her eyes bright with frustration. "I think that's brave, but it's foolish. You'll go back to your estate and your affairs. I'll be left to pick up the ashes." He shook his head. "You think I have an estate left? The Blackwood name means nothing without the land, and the land is claimed by relatives who can't stand me." Mary frowned. "Then why did you come back?" He hesitated. "Because of a promise." "To whom?" He hesitated again, choosing his words carefully. "My father, before he died. There's something I must do to claim what remains. I can't explain yet." "Then don't," she said coldly. "I've had enough of your family's promises." He looked at her with quiet pain. "I deserve that." That night, the house was silent, except for the soft breathing of the fire. Mary sat by the window sewing. though her thoughts were elsewhere. Edward sat opposite her, the table between them like a line neither dared cross. He broke the silence. "Thomas doesn't know who I am." She didn't look up. "He doesn't need to. He deserves to. He deserves peace," she said. "Not questions that can't be answered." Edward's jaw tightened. "You're afraid. I'm careful." He leaned back. "He looks like you when he laughs." Mary put down her work. "Stop it, Edward." "Why?" "Because this isn't right. You're stirring up what's buried. Maybe it shouldn't have been buried." She stood. "You don't get to decide that." He rose too, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Tell me you never thought of me," he said quietly. Her voice shook. "I stopped thinking of you the day I realized you weren't coming back." "Liar." Her hand trembled. "Leave this house tomorrow." He exhaled, defeated. "If that's what you want, it's what's best." Neither moved for a moment, the space between them filled with all the years that couldn't be reclaimed. Then she turned away and went to her room, closing the door with a quiet finality that felt like breaking glass. When dawn came, Edward didn't leave. The road was still frozen, the snow too deep. He spent the day mending small things around the house without a word. Mary didn't stop him, but she didn't thank him either. That evening, Thomas came home early, his face red from the cold. "Mother, there's talk in the village," he said. "They say a lord is staying here. Is it true?" Mary looked at Edward, then back at her son. "He's just a traveller." Thomas frowned. "But people say he's a Blackwood." Edward's expression didn't change. "They're right," he said softly. "Edward Blackwood." The boy's eyes widened. "From the big house? The one up the valley?" "The same," Edward said. Thomas looked between them, puzzled. "Did you know each other before?" Mary said nothing. Edward smiled sadly. "A long time ago." Thomas grinned. "Then it's good you're friends again." Mary turned away quickly, her voice quiet. "Go wash up for supper." When the boy left, Edward spoke in a low voice. "He's clever. He'll start asking questions. Then you'll be gone before he finds answers," she said. He studied her for a long time, then nodded. "Tomorrow, then?" Mary swallowed. "Yes, tomorrow." But the next morning, the sound of hoofbeats broke the quiet before sunrise. Edward stepped outside and saw two men approaching on horseback, strangers in city coats. One of them handed him an envelope sealed with black wax. He read it slowly, his face pale against the cold. Mary came to the door. "What is it?" He looked up, eyes dark with something unspoken. "It's from my father's lawyer. There's a condition to the inheritance, a promise I made before he died." "What promise?" she asked. Edward's voice dropped to a whisper. "One that could ruin everything, Mary. I have to marry someone else." Mary stared at him as if she hadn't heard right. The cold air moved between them, lifting her hair, carrying the smoke from the chimney. "You have to what?" Edward folded the letter and slid it into his coat. "It was my father's final wish," he said. "He made me swear before he died. I didn't think it would come to this." Her voice came out thin. "Marry someone else." He didn't look at her. "It's complicated." "It always is," she said sharply. "That's what you said before you left for the war. That's what you said the day you rode away and promised to write." "Mary, please." She crossed her arms. Her cheeks flushed from anger more than cold. "No. If you came here looking for sympathy, you won't find it. You should have stayed in that grand house of yours and left the poor woman in the valley alone. I didn't know this would happen." "You never do." Thomas opened the door just then, rubbing his eyes. "Mother, what's going on?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "Go back inside." Edward forced a smile at the boy. "It's just a letter from town. Bad news about an old friend." Thomas nodded, half asleep, and went back in. When the door closed, Edward turned to her again. "I didn't come here to hurt you. I came to make things right." "Right," she repeated. "You think anything can make this right? You disappear for 20 years and now you stand here talking about duty and promises you made to another woman." He took a step closer, his voice low. "It isn't like that. I owe her family. You owe everyone but yourself," she said. "And you owe me more than anyone." The silence stretched between them. Then Edward said almost to himself, "If I refuse, the estate goes to my cousins. Everything my father built will be gone." Mary laughed without joy. "And what does that matter to me?" It matters because the estate employs half the valley, he said. If they take it, they'll sell the land, evict the tenants. You know what that means for these people. She shook her head slowly. You think you can save them by ruining yourself again? By chaining yourself to someone you don't love? Maybe this is what I deserve. Mary looked at him for a long moment, then turned toward the door. You always talk about what you deserve, never about what you want. He caught her arm gently. And what if what I want isn't possible? Then you'll learn to live with it, she said, pulling free. Like I did. She went inside, leaving him alone in the snow. Later that morning she found him by the fire, the letter spread open on the table. His face was hard, unreadable. What does it say? She asked quietly. He hesitated before answering. It's the same name I heard years ago, Margaret Whitby. Her father and mine made the arrangement before the war. I was supposed to marry her then. I refused. It cost me my inheritance. Mary's eyes narrowed. And now you'll give in. If I don't, the Blackwood name ends with me. Maybe it should, she said. He looked up sharply. You don't mean that. I do, she said. Your name brought nothing but pain. To you, to me, to everyone caught between your family's pride and their silence. He said nothing. The fire crackled. That afternoon, the villagers began to appear one by one under one excuse or another. A jar returned, a question about sewing, curious eyes, curious tongues. The valley always smelled gossip before the truth. Mrs. Graham arrived last, pretending kindness. I thought I'd check if you needed more flour, dear, she said sweetly. Her eyes drifted toward the tall man near the window. Oh, I see you have company. How wonderful. A gentleman, too. Mary straightened her back. Mr. Blackwood was leaving tomorrow. Blackwood? Mrs. Graham's brows shot up. As in the manor. The same, Edward said dryly. Well, the woman said, smiling with her lips and not her eyes, the valley hasn't seen a Blackwood in years. Some say the estate's cursed now. Maybe it needs a woman's touch to clean it up. Her gaze flicked toward Mary. Though I suppose you're too busy here. Mary forced a polite smile. Indeed. When Mrs. Graham left, Edward said, They'll talk. They already do, Mary replied. That evening, Thomas lingered by the fire. Mother, he said, Mr. Blackwood said he used to live up the valley. Does that mean he's rich? Edward smiled. Not as much as I used to be. Thomas grinned. I like him, Mother. He's not like the men in town. He listens. Mary's heart twisted. He'll be leaving soon. The boy frowned. Why? It's nicer when he's here. Edward met Mary's eyes over the boy's head. Because sometimes grown-ups have things they must do, Thomas, even if they don't want to. Edward's voice softened. Especially then. When Thomas went to bed, Mary spoke quietly. Don't fill his head with promises. I wouldn't, Edward said. He's a good boy. He deserves honesty. He deserves peace, she said again. And he won't have it if you stay. Edward rose from his chair. I'll leave in the morning, you have my word. She nodded but didn't look at him. At dawn, Mary watched from the window as he saddled his horse. She didn't go outside, didn't say goodbye. Thomas stood beside her, frowning. He didn't even eat breakfast. He has business, she said. When the sound of hooves faded, Thomas turned to her. You look sad. She touched his hair. It's nothing, love. Go to your work. After he left, she sat down, the silence pressing heavy around her. She told herself it was better this way. She had survived before. She would again. But the next afternoon, the sound of horses came again. 2 this time. She stepped to the door and froze. Edward was back, dismounting beside a man in a dark coat. I thought you'd gone, she said. I had to return something, he replied, handing her an envelope. It's your name. She frowned. My name. It's in this letter, he said. My father wrote it before he died. He meant for you to have it, but it was never sent. She hesitated, staring at the seal. Why would your father write to me? Because he knew what he'd done, Edward said. He stopped our letters, paid your husband to take you away from the valley. The world seemed to tilt. That's a lie. I wish it were, he said softly. He confessed on his deathbed. I found the letters in his study. Every word I wrote he kept. Mary's hands shook as she broke the seal. The handwriting was unmistakable. Lord Blackwood's heavy, elegant script. The words cut through her like ice. She read of her own life, arranged by the will of men she barely knew. Payments, instructions, a warning to keep her away from his son, for the good of the family. She couldn't speak. Edward watched her face pale. "I had to tell you," he said. "You deserved the truth." Her voice trembled. "And what am I supposed to do with it? Bury it beside him?" He took a step forward. "No, let it free you." "Free me?" she repeated bitterly. "You think one letter can give back 20 years? "No," he said, "but it might give us a chance to start again." She looked at him, tears bright in her eyes. "A chance? You stand here bound to another woman, carrying your father's ghosts, and you dare to speak of chances?" Edward's voice broke. "Because I can't stop loving you, Mary." She turned away, pressing her hand to her mouth to keep from crying. "You should have stopped a long time ago." He stepped closer, his tone rough. "If I could trade every acre of that land, every coin, just to undo what was done—" "But you can't," she said. "None of us can." They stood there, the fire between them, neither able to look away. Then Thomas's voice came from the hall. "Mother, is everything all right?" Mary quickly wiped her face. "Yes, darling. Go back to bed." When the boy disappeared again, she whispered, "You need to go, Edward. Please." He shook his head. "Not yet, there's something else. The lawyer will come tomorrow to read the will. I need to know what's truly mine and what isn't." "Then go to your grand house and do it," she said. "Leave us in peace." "I can't," he said quietly, "because whatever happens there will decide what happens to you." She frowned. "To me?" He hesitated, the truth heavy on his tongue. "My father left a condition about you in his will. If I claim the inheritance, I must fulfill his last command." "What command?" she demanded. He looked at her, pain in every word. "That I marry Margaret Whitby before the year is out, or everything, including your cottage, will belong to them." Mary felt the room spin. "My home?" "Yes," he said. "He wrote it himself. This land was once part of the estate. If the cousins take it, they'll drive you away." Her face went white. "You're telling me that my life, my son's life, depends on whether you marry another woman?" Edward's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes." She stared at him, her heart breaking all over again. "Then there's nothing more to say." He tried to speak, but no words came. She turned away, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "Get out, Edward, before I forget what little forgiveness I have left." He stood for a moment, helpless, then moved toward the door. Outside, the snow began to fall again, covering his tracks almost as soon as he made them. Inside, Mary sank into the chair by the fire, staring at the flames until they blurred. She had no tears left, only the sound of the wind outside, whispering the same cruel truth it always had. But even through the storm, she could still hear his voice echoing in her mind. "I have to marry someone else." The next morning, the village was already stirring when Mary walked down the road to town. People turned to look. Whispers followed her like shadows. She kept her eyes forward, hands tight around the basket she carried, pretending not to hear. At the post office, Mrs. Graham was waiting as if she'd been standing there all morning. "Oh, Mary," she said with her syrupy smile. "You've heard, haven't you? The whole valley is talking about it." Mary set her basket down. "About what?" "About Lord Blackwood's son, the prodigal heir, back from the dead. And they say he's to marry Miss Margaret Whitby before Christmas. Quite the fine match." Mary didn't blink. "Then I wish him joy." Mrs. Graham leaned in, voice dropping. "Funny, though, that he's been seen up the hill with you. A man about to be married shouldn't visit widows alone, don't you think?" Mary's jaw tightened. "Do you need anything else, Mrs. Graham?" "Oh, no, dear, just thought you should know how tongues wag. Best to be careful." Mary picked up her basket and walked out without another word. The cold air outside felt sharper, cleaner. She walked quickly, head high, but by the time she reached home her hands were shaking. Through the window she saw Edward by the hearth with Thomas, showing him how to repair a loose hinge. They looked almost like father and son. The sight twisted something inside her. When she opened the door, both turned. "You're back early," Edward said. "I had enough of town," she said. "It's full of people who think they know more than they do." Thomas grinned. "Mr. Blackwood says he used to build things like this when he was my age." Edward smiled faintly. "Not quite like this. I had servants to fix things back then, but a man should learn to use his hands. Mary removed her coat. You shouldn't be filling his head with stories. Thomas looked puzzled. Why not? Because he needs to learn how the world really works, she said. Not how it used to be for people with money. Edward's expression darkened. You think that's all I ever was, isn't it? He stood, his tone quiet. I lost everything that mattered long before the money went. Mary glanced at Thomas. Go wash up, love. Supper soon. When the boy disappeared, she turned back to Edward. You shouldn't be here when he's home. It's not right. I came to speak to you, he said. The lawyer arrives tonight. I'll go to the estate with him in the morning. Then speak quickly. He hesitated. I need you to understand. This marriage, this promise, it isn't love. It's debt. My father tied it to the land, to the tenants. If I refuse, they lose everything. The valley will be ruined. You can't save everyone, she said. You never could. Maybe not. But I won't see them suffer for my choices. And what of me, Edward? Of Thomas? Do we matter in this fine plan of yours? He flinched. You matter more than any of them. Then why do you still intend to marry her? Because I have no other way. She shook her head, stepping back. You always find a reason to call weakness duty. Before he could answer, hoofbeats sounded outside. Edward looked toward the window. That will be the lawyer. Moments later, the door opened without knocking. A short man in a long grey coat stepped in, brushing off the snow. Mr. Blackwood, he said briskly. I trust you've read the will. Edward nodded. I have. The man adjusted his spectacles. Then you know what must be done. The papers are prepared. We'll need your signature by morning. Mary spoke before Edward could. You'll have to do that elsewhere. This isn't your office. The lawyer blinked at her. Mrs. Collins, I presume. The cottage is on Blackwood land, technically part of the estate. Her back stiffened. Not anymore, it's my home. Edward stepped between them. That's enough, Mr. Price. We'll discuss this at the house. The lawyer sniffed. As you wish. But the terms are clear, sir. Miss Whitby expects your visit before the week ends. He gave a small bow to Mary and left. When the door closed, Mary let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He spoke of my home as if it were a ledger entry. Edward's voice was low. That's how my father saw everything. And now you'll marry into that world again, she said. A woman like her, Margaret Whitby. What would she want with a man who spent 20 years trying to forget his title? She doesn't want me, he said. She wants the name, the same as my father did. Then give it to her, Mary said bitterly, and be done with it. He moved closer, his voice rough. You don't mean that. I do, because if you stay here, you'll destroy what little peace I've managed to build. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. If that's what you wish. That night, Thomas slept soundly, but Mary couldn't. She sat by the fire while Edward packed his things. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally he said, Do you remember the orchard behind the manor? The day you said yes to me under that apple tree? She kept her eyes on the fire. That girl is long gone, Edward. I remember the look on your face when I promised to come back. You believed me. I was a fool. He stepped closer. If I could stay, I would. But the moment I sign those papers, it's over. Everything I once owned will be secure, and I'll be trapped again. She rose, her voice barely above a whisper. Then don't sign them. He met her eyes. And lose the valley. Lose me instead, is that it? He didn't answer. She shook her head. I can't do this again. I won't wait another 20 years. He reached out, but she stepped back. Don't, she said. You've already taken enough from me. Edward's shoulders sagged. I never meant to. Intentions don't matter, she said. Go. He stood there, breathing hard, then nodded once. If I go now, I might reach the manor before midnight. The lawyer can stay there until morning. Do what you must. He hesitated at the door. Mary, don't say goodbye, she interrupted. It never means what it should. He gave her a look filled with everything he couldn't say, and stepped into the night. When the door closed, Mary sank into the chair, covering her face with her hands. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock and the wind outside. She stayed there until the lamp burned low, half hoping he would return, half dreading that he might. The next morning, the valley woke to another rumor. The heir of the Blackwood estate had been seen at the Whitby house, dining with Margaret herself. The servants whispered that the wedding date was already being discussed. Mary tried to ignore it. She buried herself in her work, sewing until her fingers bled. 3 days later, she was delivering a mended coat in town when she heard the sound of hooves behind her. She turned and saw a carriage gleaming black against the slush. A woman stepped out, her fur-lined cloak brushing the ground. "Mrs. Collins, I presume," said the woman, her voice cool and elegant. Mary recognized her instantly. Margaret Whitby. "Miss Whitby," Mary said, bowing her head slightly. "What brings you to this side of the valley?" Margaret smiled without warmth. "Curiosity, and perhaps in clarity. You see, I met with Mr. Blackwood yesterday. He spoke your name." Mary's heart thudded once. "Did he?" "He did," Margaret said, studying her. "He told me you were an old friend, but his tone, well, it wasn't quite the tone of friendship. I can't control what others imagine." Margaret's smile sharpened. "No, but you can avoid feeding the gossip. A woman in your position should be careful. The valley is small, and people talk." Mary met her eyes. "I've lived with their talk for 20 years. It can't hurt me now." "Perhaps," Margaret said, "but it can hurt him. Edward is a man of honor. Even if he's forgotten how to behave like one, he'll keep his promise. You should help him do that." Mary's voice stayed calm. "He doesn't need my help to make his choices." Margaret stepped closer. "Oh, but he does, because if he doesn't fulfill that promise, the estate will fall apart. And if that happens, your little cottage, your peace, your son's future, all of it will vanish. You see, Mrs. Collins, the world isn't kind to women who cling to ghosts." The words hit like a slap, but Mary didn't flinch. "Then you'll have your husband, Miss Whitby. I have no wish to keep him." Margaret gave a small, satisfied nod. "Good. I'm glad we understand each other." She turned toward the carriage, then paused. "He speaks of you often. I wonder if he realizes that pity and love can sound so much alike." Mary didn't answer. She watched the carriage roll away until it vanished into the grey mist. That evening, Thomas came home late. His cheeks were red, his eyes bright. "Mother, you'll never believe who I saw, Mr. Blackwood. He was at the Whitby place. They say he's to marry her soon." Mary forced a smile. "That's good news, isn't it?" Thomas frowned. "He didn't look happy." "Not everyone marries for happiness," she said. "But he told me once that a man should follow his heart." She looked at him gently. "Then maybe he's learned that hearts don't always get to choose." The boy nodded, though he didn't understand. When he went to bed, Mary stood by the window, staring out at the dark valley. She told herself it didn't matter anymore. Whatever bond had tied her to Edward Blackwood was gone. But deep inside, she knew that wasn't true. Hours later, long after she'd doused the lamp, the faint echo of hooves reached her ears again. She sat up, heart pounding. Then came the knock at the door. She hesitated before opening it. Edward stood there, soaked with rain, his eyes wild with exhaustion and despair. "Mary," he said hoarsely, "I can't marry her." Rain poured off his coat in rivulets, pooling on the stone threshold. Mary stood frozen, holding the door half open. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "I had to come." Edward's voice was rough, half broken. "I couldn't do it." "You mean you couldn't marry her?" He nodded once. "I tried to sign the papers, to do what was expected. But every word felt like betrayal." "You made a promise," she said. "You said it yourself, and I've made too many already. Promises to men who are gone, to ghosts who don't care what becomes of me, or you. You think defying them will change anything? They'll strip you of everything. The land, the house. Let them have it," he said, stepping closer. "What use is land without a heart to return to?" Mary's hand tightened on the door. "You should leave before someone sees you." "Let them see," he said. "I'm done hiding." She stared at him, her voice shaking. "You'll ruin what's left of your name." He gave a tired laugh. "That name ruined us long before tonight." She opened her mouth to argue, but something in his eyes stopped her. He looked like a man who had been fighting too long, carrying a burden that finally broke him. "Please," he said, "just let me in." She hesitated, then stepped aside. Edward crossed the threshold, dripping water on the floor. The room felt smaller with him in it, the air charged and trembling. He took off his coat and hung it by the fire without asking. Mary watched him. "Does she know you're gone?" "She will by morning," he said. "Margaret doesn't love me. She never did." She wants what the Blackwood name can buy her. And what do you want? He looked at her steadily. You. That's never changed. She turned away, heart pounding. Don't say things you'll regret when daylight comes. I've regretted every day I didn't say them. You're still bound to her, Mary said. By law, by honor, by everything that ever mattered to men like you. Honor, he said bitterly. My father used that word when he destroyed our letters. When he paid your husband to marry you and disappear. Tell me, where was honor then? She flinched. Stop. No, he said. I'm done pretending. He took 20 years from us. I won't give him another day. Edward. He stepped closer, his voice low. You can send me away if you must, but I'm not leaving because of them. I'll leave only if you tell me you don't feel what I feel. Mary's breath caught. The words hung in the air between them, heavy as thunder. She wanted to deny it, to end it before it began again, but she couldn't speak. When she finally found her voice, it came out as a whisper. You don't know what you're asking. I do, he said. I'm asking for one truth, nothing more. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. The truth is, I never stopped loving you. He closed his eyes for a moment, like a man struck by both pain and relief. Then that's enough. She shook her head. No, it isn't. Love doesn't feed a boy. It doesn't stop gossip or keep a roof over our heads. I'll work, he said. I'll find a way. I'm not the Lord's son anymore. I don't care about titles or estates. You don't know what a life like that means, she said. Poverty is a different kind of war. I've fought worse, he replied. Mary turned from him and sank into a chair, covering her face. You're mad. Maybe, he said softly, but I'd rather be mad with you than sane without you. The rain outside softened into a steady rhythm. For a long time neither spoke. Then a knock startled them both. Mary rose quickly. No one can see you here. Edward moved toward the door, but she stopped him. Hide in the back room. He hesitated. Mary, go! He slipped into the small bedroom just as the door opened. Margaret Whitby stood on the threshold, rain beading on her fine cloak. Mrs. Collins, she said, her tone cold. I see I was right. Mary steadied herself. Miss Whitby, it's late. I followed him, Margaret said flatly. He left the estate like a thief in the night. I wondered where he'd go. I can't imagine why you'd come to me, Mary said. Margaret's gaze swept the room. Because this is where he hides. It always was, wasn't it? Even when you were just the gardener's daughter. Mary's hands clenched. You're mistaken. Am I? Margaret stepped closer, eyes gleaming. He told me he wouldn't marry me. He said his heart was elsewhere. I thought he meant freedom. But no, he meant you. Mary met her gaze without flinching. If he said that, then you have your answer. Oh, I have it, Margaret said. And so will the rest of Yorkshire by morning. The villagers already whisper about you. Imagine what they'll say when they learn you've taken the heir of Blackwood into your bed. Mary's face went white. You'll spread lies. I won't have to, Margaret said. You've given them the truth to twist. She turned toward the door, but Mary caught her arm. You don't have to do this. He's not yours to keep, and he never was. Margaret pulled free, her voice sharp. And what are you then, his salvation, his second chance? Don't flatter yourself. He'll ruin you like he ruins everything he touches. Mary's voice trembled but held firm. Leave my house. Margaret's eyes flicked toward the back room. Tell him this. I'll see him broken before I let him shame me. The estate, the land, his name, they'll all be mine. And when the papers are signed, he'll have nothing left but regret. She slammed the door behind her and disappeared into the rain. Mary stood trembling, the echo of the door still vibrating through the cottage. Edward stepped from the shadows. She followed me, he said. I didn't think— No, Mary interrupted. You never do. She won't keep quiet, he said. She'll make sure the valley turns on you. It already has, Mary said. But I won't let you destroy what's left of my life. He took a step forward. You think I came here to ruin you? I think you came because you don't know how to stop, she said. You bring storms wherever you go, Edward. He stopped, breathing hard. Then tell me what to do. Leave, she whispered. Before everything burns again. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. If that's what you want, it's what's right. He looked around the small room, his eyes softening. It feels like home, he said quietly. More than that empty manor ever did. Mary turned away, unable to answer. I'll go by morning, he said. You have my word. She said nothing. He walked to the door, opened it slightly, and paused. "If I can't give you a future," he said, "I can at least give you peace. Peace comes when people stop making promises," she said. He managed a faint smile. "Then I'll make none." When he left, the rain swallowed him whole. Mary sank into the chair again, staring at the dying fire. She wanted to cry but couldn't. Thomas came out of his room, rubbing his eyes. "Mother, who was that shouting?" "No one," she said quickly. "Go back to bed." He hesitated. "Was it him?" She didn't answer. The boy frowned. "I heard another voice. A woman's." "She was lost," Mary said. "It's nothing for you to worry about." Thomas studied her, sensing the lie. "You're crying." "I'm tired," she said softly. "That's all." He stepped closer and hugged her. "I like him, Mother. I don't care what people say." Mary froze. "What do people say?" "That you and Mr. Blackwood used to be sweethearts." Her breath caught. "Who told you that?" "Mrs. Graham said it in town. Everyone heard. They laughed." Mary closed her eyes. "Go to bed, Thomas." When he was gone, she sat in silence for a long time. The fire burned down to embers. Outside, the storm eased into mist, and somewhere down the valley, a bell rang faintly from the manor. Edward was gone. Margaret would make sure the world knew, and by morning the life Mary had built, the quiet, fragile peace, would begin to crack apart. She rose and went to the window, staring out at the dark hills. For the first time in 20 years, she didn't know whether she was waiting for dawn or dreading it. Then, in the distance, a faint flicker of torchlight appeared on the road leading up the hill. It was heading straight for her cottage. The torchlight wavered closer, a single glow moving through the fog. Mary stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass. For a moment, she thought it was Edward returning again, reckless enough to defy everything. But as the figure came into view, she saw the tall, thin shape of the postman. He carried a bundle beneath his arm. She opened the door before he could knock. "Mrs. Collins," he said, tipping his cap. "Letter for you. Came down from the manor at dawn." Mary hesitated. "From whom?" "Couldn't say," he replied. "Only that it bears the Blackwood seal." Her heart sank. She thanked him and closed the door. The wax was unbroken, stamped with the crest she knew too well. She stared at it for a long time before sliding her thumb beneath the seal. The handwriting was Edward's. "Mary, I have left the manor. I will not marry Margaret Whitby. The cost is everything my family built, but I will not build more lies. I'm leaving Yorkshire for a while. There's something I must find, and when I do, I'll return. Until then, keep this letter. It holds proof that your land is yours, not theirs. I meant what I said last night. I will never ask forgiveness, but I will spend whatever life remains to deserve it. E. Blackwood." She read it twice, then pressed the page to her chest. The world felt too still. By noon, word had spread through the valley. Mrs. Graham came to her door with false sympathy and eager eyes. "Have you heard? The wedding's off. Miss Whitby left the estate this morning in a fury. They say she's gone to London." Mary kept her expression calm. "Then I wish her a safe journey." "Oh, Mary," Mrs. Graham whispered, leaning close. "You must be careful. People are saying things again. They think Mr. Blackwood left because of you." Mary's jaw tightened. "People will think what they please. I have work to do." She closed the door firmly and leaned against it, heart racing. For days the valley buzzed with talk about the cancelled wedding, the estate in chaos, the heir who had vanished. Thomas heard every word in town and brought them home, trying to make sense of it all. "Why does everyone care who he marries?" he asked one evening. "Because they have nothing better to do," Mary said. "But it's not fair. They don't know him." She sighed. "They don't need to. People like him are stories before they're men." Thomas frowned. "You talk about him like you know him better than anyone." Mary looked at her son, startled by his tone. "He's a man from my past, that's all. Then why do you look out the window every night?" She turned away, hiding her face. "Go to bed, Thomas." He hesitated, then went quietly up the narrow stairs. The days grew shorter. Winter deepened. Edward did not return. Then one morning, a messenger from the manor arrived with a sealed parcel. Inside were papers, legal documents transferring ownership of the cottage and surrounding land to Mary Collins, signed by Edward Blackwood. She sat at the table staring at the signature, unable to breathe. Beneath the papers was a folded note in Edward's hand. "Keep what's yours. Whatever happens, don't let them take it again." Her fingers trembled as she traced the ink. That afternoon, Thomas came running up the path, shouting her name. "Mother, there's someone at the smithy asking for you." Mary wiped her hands on her apron. "Who is it?" "I don't know. A stranger. He said it's important." She followed him down the hill, her heart pounding. The smithy was warm, filled with the clang of metal. A tall man stood by the forge, his coat dusty from travel. "Mrs. Collins," he said, removing his hat. "My name's Fenton. I served under Captain Edward Blackwood." Her breath caught. "You knew him?" "Yes, ma'am. He left something with me before he departed for the coast. Said it should reach you if he didn't return by spring." Mary's stomach turned. "Didn't return?" Fenton nodded. "He planned to sail north, to Scotland, maybe further. He said he was looking for something his father left behind. I begged him to wait for better weather, but he wouldn't. Said he owed a woman his word." Mary took the small leather pouch the man offered. "Did he say anything else?" "Only this." Fenton hesitated. He said, "Tell her I'm not lost this time, just late." Her throat closed around the words. "Thank you." When he left, she opened the pouch. Inside were 2 letters and a small locket she hadn't seen in 20 years. She recognized it instantly. It had once been hers, a gift from Edward the summer before he left for the war. Inside, the tiny portrait of her younger self stared back, smiling, untouched by time. Thomas peered over her shoulder. "Who gave you that?" She closed her hand around it. "Someone I used to know." He studied her. "You still love him?" She didn't answer. Snow came heavy that week. The cottage was cut off for days. Mary kept herself busy with mending and chores, but the silence pressed on her. Every creak of the wind sounded like footsteps, every shadow like a promise unkept. Then one morning the knock came. It wasn't hesitant this time. It was firm, deliberate. Mary opened the door to find the lawyer, Mr. Price, standing there, hat in hand. His eyes were sharp behind his spectacles. "Mrs. Collins," he said briskly, "you've received documents that do not belong to you." Her spine stiffened. "They were delivered legally." "Not lawfully," he said. "Mr. Blackwood's estate remains unsettled. Until his whereabouts are confirmed, the property is not his to grant." "Then let him come and say so himself," Mary said. Mr. Price smiled thinly. "That may be difficult. No one knows where he is. Then I suggest you find him before making claims on my home." He stepped closer. "Careful, Mrs. Collins, the law favors the living and those who can afford it." Mary met his gaze steadily. "So does truth." His smile faltered. "You always were bold for a woman of your station." "Get off my land," she said. He tipped his hat. "You'll regret this. When the estate passes to Miss Whitby, she'll see to it that your name disappears from every record." Mary's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. "Then she'll have to fight me first." He left, muttering under his breath, and the sound of his horse faded into the wind. That night, Thomas found her sitting by the fire, the legal papers clutched in her lap. "Mother," he said softly, "is it true they can take the house?" "Not while I breathe," she said. He nodded solemnly. "Then I'll help you fight." Her hand brushed his hair. "You shouldn't have to fight my battles, Thomas. They're ours now," he said simply. She smiled faintly. "How you sound like him." "Mr. Blackwood?" "Yes." The boy hesitated. "Do you think he'll come back?" She looked at the window, where snowflakes drifted in the dark. "If he can, he will." Weeks passed. Winter began to fade, and the valley thawed under a reluctant sun. But no word came from Edward. One afternoon, while Mary fetched water from the well, she saw 2 riders approaching. One she recognized, Mr. Price again. The other was unfamiliar, a young man in a navy coat carrying a leather satchel. Mr. Price dismounted. "Mrs. Collins, you leave me no choice. The estate must be transferred. You have no proof of ownership beyond a forged signature." Mary's heart raced. Forged? Mr. Blackwood's signature was not witnessed. It holds no weight. The property returns to the manor. Thomas ran out of the house. "That you can't take our home." "Mind your tone, boy," Mr. Price said sharply. "You've no say in these matters." Mary stepped between them. "This land is mine. Signed or not, he gave it to me." The young man with the satchel cleared his throat. "Sir, if I may, this document," he said, pulling out a folded paper, came through the London registry this morning. It bears Captain Edward Blackwood's mark and seal, confirmed by naval authorities. Mr. Price blinked. That's impossible. It's not, the young man said. It states that Captain Blackwood has settled all debts and relinquished the estate to local stewardship. Furthermore, he confirms Mrs. Collins' ownership of the Valley Cottage. Mary's knees nearly gave way. He's alive? The young man nodded. Alive, yes, though recovering. His ship ran aground near the northern coast. He's expected to return within the week. Mr. Price turned pale. You have no proof he wrote that himself. The young man held up the seal. I saw him sign it. For once, Mr. Price had no reply. He mounted his horse, face tight, and rode off without another word. Mary stood in the cold, her hands trembling. Thomas looked up at her. He's coming back. She swallowed hard. He's alive. That night she built a fire bright enough to drive away the last of winter. For the first time in months, she let herself imagine the sound of his voice, the look in his eyes. But before dawn another messenger arrived, pounding on the door with urgency. Mrs. Collins, he said breathlessly, there's news from the coast. Captain Blackwood's ship. He didn't make it to London. Mary's heart stopped. What do you mean? The man looked down. There was a storm. They found wreckage along the northern cliffs this morning. She gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. No, you're mistaken. I'm sorry, ma'am. They said his belongings washed ashore. No survivors were seen. Her vision blurred. No. The man left quietly, his boots crunching on the frost. Mary closed the door and stood in the silence. The crackle of the fire, the only sound. She pressed the locket in her hand until it hurt, whispering to the empty room. You promised you'd come back. Then, from outside, over the wind and the dying fire, came a faint sound, the distant rhythm of hooves on the frozen road. The hooves grew louder, echoing through the valley like a heartbeat. Mary stood frozen by the door, unable to move. Thomas came running down the stairs, half-dressed, his hair tousled. Mother, did you hear that? She could only nod. The sound stopped outside the gate. Then came the knock. Mary opened the door slowly. A man stood there, soaked to the bone, his coat torn, his face pale but unmistakably alive. Edward. He leaned against the doorframe, breathless. I told you I'd come back, he said weakly, and then he nearly collapsed. Mary caught him before he fell, shouting for Thomas. Together they brought him to the fire, his boots leaving trails of mud across the floor. Thomas stared at him wide-eyed. He's alive. Edward managed a faint smile. So it seems. Mary knelt beside him. You were dead. Almost, he said. The ship broke apart on the rocks. I swam until I couldn't anymore. Fishermen found me north of Whitby. Took me weeks to get back. She shook her head in disbelief. You shouldn't have tried. I made you a promise, he said simply, and this time I kept it. Thomas fetched blankets while Mary tended to him. His hands were cold as stone, his skin marked with bruises and salt. When she pressed a cup of broth to his lips, he drank slowly, never taking his eyes off her. You shouldn't be here, she said softly. If the lawyer or Miss Whitby finds out— She's gone, he interrupted. Margaret's gone to London for good. She took her pride with her. Mary frowned. And the estate? Lost. Sold to the cousins. I have nothing now, Mary. Nothing but what I gave you. She shook her head. You didn't have to lose everything. I didn't lose it, he said. I left it. Thomas looked between them. You mean you're staying? Edward turned to the boy, smiling weakly. If your mother will let me. Thomas grinned. You can stay as long as you like. Thomas, Mary said warningly, but Edward's laughter cut her off. It was quiet, rough, but real. I see he's not afraid to speak his mind, Edward said. He gets that from me, Mary said. He looked at her, his eyes soft. I know. For a while they said nothing. The wind outside began to die, and the firelight warmed the room. Edward leaned back in the chair, exhausted. I found something, he murmured. Before the wreck. What? She asked. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, damp but intact. This was in my father's desk, hidden under the false bottom. It's addressed to you. Mary hesitated before taking it. To me. He nodded. Read it. She opened it carefully. The ink was faded but legible. The words made her breath hitch. Mary Collins, If you receive this, my son has learned the truth. What I did to you was unforgivable. I feared the scandal of your love more than I valued his happiness. In punishing him, I destroyed you both. Take whatever comfort you can in knowing that I regret it to my dying breath. I leave to you, through my son, the deed to the cottage and the land it stands on. It is yours, as it always should have been. Forgive an old man who mistook pride for honor." Lord Henry Blackwood Mary stared at the letter, her hands trembling. He meant to give it to me all along." Edward nodded. "He just couldn't face it." She pressed the paper to her chest. "All this time, I found it days before I left," Edward said. "I wanted you to have it, to see that your life wasn't built on his cruelty." Tears welled in her eyes. "You nearly died for this." He smiled faintly. "I'd have died anyway if I hadn't tried." Thomas leaned forward. "So now it's truly ours?" Mary looked at him and nodded. "Yes, it's ours." The boy grinned. "Then no one can make us leave again." "No one," Edward said quietly. He tried to stand but swayed, catching himself on the table. Mary rushed to his side. "You need rest." "I need to see the valley," he said stubbornly. "It's been too long." "Tomorrow," she said. "You won't make it 10 steps tonight." He smiled, conceding. "Always giving orders. And you never listen." They stared at each other, the years between them folding away. Then she turned, flustered. "Thomas, prepare the spare cot." "I can sleep by the fire," Edward said. "It's warm enough." "You'll do no such thing," Mary said. "You'll take the bed." He raised an eyebrow. "And where will you sleep?" "Where I always do," she replied, crossing her arms. He chuckled, but said no more. That night, after Thomas had gone to bed, Mary checked on Edward. He was asleep, his breathing steady, the letter from his father resting on the table beside him. She watched him for a moment, then reached out and brushed a lock of damp hair from his forehead. He stirred, but didn't wake. She whispered, "You foolish man." The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. Edward was already awake, sitting by the window with a blanket around his shoulders. "It's beautiful," he said. "I forgot how the light looks here." "You shouldn't be up," she scolded gently. "I feel stronger." He wasn't lying. Color had returned to his cheeks. "Thomas has gone to the forge," she said. "He told everyone you survived. The whole valley will know by noon." Edward winced. "Then I should face them. They won't be kind." "They never were," he said. They spent the day in quiet work. Mary mended clothes while Edward repaired a broken fence outside. Every so often she caught herself glancing out the window just to see him there, solid, real, alive. By afternoon, she heard voices on the road. Mrs. Graham and 2 other villagers were approaching, their eyes full of curiosity. "Well," Mrs. Graham said loudly, "I see the dead walk again." Edward turned to her calmly. "Mrs. Graham, still spreading news faster than the wind, I see." She flushed. "People have a right to know what's true." "And what is that?" he asked. "That you've returned here to a woman who isn't your wife." Mary stepped forward before he could answer. "He's here because he has nowhere else to go, and because this house belongs to him as much as to me." Mrs. Graham snorted. "We'll see if the new owners of the manor agree." "They won't matter soon," Edward said. "The deed to this land is in her name, witnessed and sealed by the Crown." The woman blinked. "That can't be." "It can," Mary said sharply. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I have work to finish." Mrs. Graham left with a sour expression, muttering under her breath. When they were gone, Edward leaned against the fence, laughing softly. "You've learned how to fight them." "I learned from the best," she said. That evening they ate together at the table. Thomas talked endlessly about the forge, about the horses, about how proud the blacksmith was to have him. Edward listened with genuine interest, asking questions, smiling often. When Thomas finally went to bed, Mary began clearing the dishes. Edward stood to help her. "You don't have to," she said. "I want to." They worked in silence for a moment. Then he said, "When I was adrift, I thought of this kitchen, the sound of the kettle, the way you'd hum when you thought no one could hear." She stopped, her hands trembling slightly. "That was a long time ago, not long enough for me to forget." "Edward, please." He stepped closer. "You can pretend all you like, Mary, but we both know what's still between us." She turned away. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." His voice was quiet, but she could feel it in her bones. The space between them felt charged again, fragile and dangerous. "Don't," she whispered. "Not when everything's finally still." "I can't stop caring," he said, "even if you tell me to." Her eyes filled with tears. "And what happens then? The valley will never forgive us. You know what they'll say." "Let them talk," he said. "We've lived through worse." She shook her head. "You don't understand what it's like to be the woman they whisper about." "I do," he said softly, "because I've been the man they curse." She stared at him, speechless. He took a slow breath. "If I leave tomorrow, it won't be because of fear. It'll be because you tell me to. So tell me now, Mary. Should I go?" Her voice broke. "I don't know anymore." He reached out, fingers brushing hers, gentle, hesitant. "Then I'll stay until you do." Neither moved for a long moment. The fire crackled between them. Then outside, the sharp sound of wheels on gravel broke the silence. Mary turned toward the window. A carriage was pulling up the hill, lanterns flickering against the dusk. Edward's expression hardened. "That's not a villager." Mary's stomach tightened. Who would come this late? He stepped to the window and saw the crest on the carriage door, the Whitby seal gleaming in the light. His voice dropped to a whisper. "It's Margaret." The carriage door opened before Mary could speak. Margaret Whitby stepped out, her boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. She was dressed perfectly as always, though her cheeks were flushed from the cold and fury. Behind her, a footman held an umbrella, but she brushed him away and walked straight toward the door. Edward opened it first. "You shouldn't be here, Margaret." "Nor should you," she replied sharply, stepping past him into the cottage. "Yet here you are, alive, disgracefully alive, and living like a vagabond with your old flame." Mary folded her arms. "This is my home, Miss Whitby. You're not welcome." Margaret turned, her eyes sweeping the small room. "So this is what you left me for? A cottage with smoke-stained walls and patched curtains." She gave a short laugh. "How noble of you, Edward. A hero of pity." Edward's jaw tightened. "Watch your tongue." "Oh, I will," she said, voice icy, "because it seems no one else will. You've shamed my family, humiliated me in front of half of Yorkshire, and you think you can hide here as if your choices mean nothing." Mary spoke quietly but firmly. "He owes you nothing, Miss Whitby." Margaret's eyes snapped to her. "Nothing? He owes me a marriage, a name, and the fortune my father secured for his failing estate. He owes me the life he promised before he decided to crawl back to you." Edward took a step forward. "You forget yourself." "I forget nothing," Margaret said. "I've spent weeks repairing what you destroyed. My father's reputation, my own. Do you know what people say now? That I drove you away with my pride, that I was too cold for the gallant Captain Blackwood." Mary's tone was calm but cutting. "If you came for sympathy, you came to the wrong house." Margaret smiled thinly. "I came for justice." Edward frowned. "What do you mean?" She pulled a folded document from her cloak and threw it onto the table. "A contract, Edward, signed and sealed. Your father's last agreement, witnessed by Mr. Price. You think your rebellion erases that? You're still bound to me by law." Mary glanced at the paper. "He told you he wouldn't marry you." "And yet he signed this," Margaret said, tapping the page. "His word, his seal. If he breaks it, I'll see him ruined in court." Edward stared at the document for a moment, then tore it cleanly in two. The sound echoed through the room. "Consider it broken," he said. Margaret's eyes flared with outrage. "You'll regret that." "I already have," he said. "For 20 years. She stepped closer, her voice trembling with fury. "You think this is love? Living in a cottage with your precious Mary, pretending you're free. The world will laugh at you both." "Let them laugh," he said. "We're done living for their approval." Margaret looked between them, her expression changing from anger to something colder. "Then you leave me no choice." Mary frowned. "What are you planning?" Margaret's smile was cruel. "The truth always finds its way out. Do you really think your neighbors will protect you once they know what you've hidden?" Edward's tone darkened. "Enough." "Oh no," she said. "Not enough. I've spent too long being quiet. They think Thomas is your son, Edward. Perhaps I'll confirm it for them." Mary's blood ran cold. "You don't know what you're saying." Margaret stepped closer to her. "Don't I? The boy has your eyes, your smile, and your timing fits far too neatly. What will the valley say when they learn you birthed a Blackwood bastard and raised him in secret?" "Stop it," Edward said through clenched teeth. Margaret ignored him. Oh, I can see it now. The captain's whore who waited 20 years for scraps of his affection. How proud you must be, Mary Collins. Mary slapped her. The sound cracked through the air like lightning. Margaret froze, one hand on her cheek, eyes wide with shock. Then, very slowly, she smiled. You've just given me more than gossip. You've given me cause. Edward stepped between them. You've said enough. Get out, before I forget I was raised a gentleman. Margaret drew herself up. You'll hear from my solicitor. I've heard from enough of them for one lifetime, he said. Go. She turned toward the door, her voice cutting as she left. This isn't over, Edward. You'll regret choosing her over me. The carriage wheels splashed through the mud and faded into the distance. Mary stood still, her hand shaking. She'll destroy us. Edward faced her. No, I'll speak to Price myself. Whatever she threatens, she can't prove it. She doesn't need proof, Mary said bitterly. The Valley will believe her. They'll believe what I tell them. They'll believe the story they prefer, she said. A woman ruined, a man misled. It's how they survive, by feeding on the fall of others. Edward took her shoulders gently. Then let them choke on it. We've lived under their judgment long enough. Mary looked up at him, torn between fear and something fierce rising inside her. You don't understand what it's like for me, Edward. They'll call me everything but a woman of honor. Thomas will hear it. He'll carry it for the rest of his life. I'll protect him. You can't protect him from words. He hesitated, then said quietly, I can give him my name. She stared at him. What are you saying? Marry me, Mary. Today, if you'll have me. Let the Valley talk all they want, but let them see us stand together. Her voice caught. You think a wedding will silence them? No, he said, but it will tell them we're not afraid. She stepped back, shaking her head. You can't fix a lifetime of pain with one promise. I'm not trying to fix it. I'm trying to start again. She turned away, trembling. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. No, Edward, not now, not like this. I won't be the reason you lose what little you have left. He looked at her, hurt in his eyes. I already lost everything that mattered the day I left you. Before she could answer, Thomas's voice came from the stairs. Mother. They both turned. The boy stood there, sleepy but alert, his face pale. What happened? I heard shouting. Mary forced a smile. It's nothing, darling. Go back to bed. Thomas frowned. That lady, was she the one he was supposed to marry? Edward nodded slowly. She was. And she hates you. She doesn't matter anymore, Edward said. Go on now. But Thomas didn't move. His gaze shifted between them, sharp and uncertain. She said things. About me. Mary stiffened. You heard her. He nodded. She said I'm your secret. That I'm his son. Silence. Edward took a step forward. Thomas, the boy's voice broke. Is it true? Mary opened her mouth but couldn't speak. Tell me, Thomas said. I want the truth. Edward's expression softened. Your mother raised you with courage and kindness. That's the truth. That's not what I asked. Mary finally found her voice. Thomas, please. He shook his head. All this time you told me my father was a good man who died far away. You never even said his name. Was it him? Mary's eyes filled with tears. It doesn't matter. It matters to me, he said quietly. Edward took a deep breath. It's true. Thomas stared at him, stunned. You're my father? Yes. The boy's face turned red, his voice trembling. And you left us? You left her alone all these years? Edward swallowed hard. I didn't know. Don't lie, Thomas shouted. You knew enough to come back and ruin everything again. Thomas, Mary said sharply, that's enough. He turned on her. You should have told me. I was trying to protect you. From what? From knowing who I am? Edward tried to speak, but Thomas's anger spilled faster than words. You think I wanted some fairy tale? I wanted the truth, just once. Mary stepped forward, tears streaming. I did what I thought was right. Thomas looked at them both, his voice shaking. You both did what was right for yourselves. He ran to the door, ignoring their calls, and disappeared into the night. Mary reached for the latch, but Edward stopped her. He needs time. He's a boy, she said, panicked. He doesn't know these roads. I'll find him. He grabbed his coat and stepped out into the darkness. The wind howled down the valley, carrying the echo of hoofbeats from the road below. The same road where years ago another man had ridden away and never come back. Mary stood at the doorway, watching Edward vanish into the storm, her voice breaking into the wind. "Don't lose him too." Edward ran into the night, calling Thomas's name into the wind. The storm had returned, sheets of rain cutting across the path, blurring the lantern light in his hand. His voice echoed off the valley walls, swallowed by thunder. "Thomas!" Nothing. Only the sound of water rushing through the ditches. He moved toward the hill, toward the line of trees where the boy might have gone to hide from anger and shame. His boots sank into the mud. At last, a small figure appeared near the stone wall at the edge of the pasture. Thomas stood there, drenched, hugging himself against the cold. When Edward reached him, the boy turned away. "Leave me alone. Not until you come home," Edward said, breathless. "You're not my home," Thomas snapped. "You never were." Edward stood still for a moment. "You're right. I wasn't there when I should have been. But I'm here now. That doesn't change anything." "It could," Edward said quietly. "If you'd let it." Thomas's voice shook. "I grew up thinking I was nothing, that my father didn't care. Do you know what that feels like?" "Yes," Edward said, "because my father made me feel the same way." Thomas blinked, surprised. "I thought he was proud of me," Edward went on. "Then I learned he was ashamed. He sent me away to erase a mistake. But that mistake was love, Thomas. The kind that doesn't disappear, no matter how long it's buried." Thomas looked down. "You still left her." "I did," Edward said, "and I'll regret it every day I live. But I swear to you I never knew about you. If I had, I would have fought heaven and earth to be by your side." The boy's shoulders trembled. "Your mother gave up everything for you," Edward said. "She faced the gossip, the hunger, the loneliness, all so you'd never know how cruel this world can be. If you hate anyone, hate me, not her." Thomas's anger cracked, leaving only confusion. "I don't hate her. I just don't understand." Edward put a hand on his shoulder. "Neither did I for a long time, but life doesn't always give you time to understand. Sometimes it just asks you to forgive." Thomas looked at him, his expression caught between tears and disbelief. "You really didn't know?" Edward shook his head. "Not until the first time I saw you. I looked at your face and knew something I'd lost had found me again." The boy hesitated, then whispered, "Mother said I have your stubbornness." "She's right," Edward said, smiling faintly. "It's the worst and best thing you could inherit." Thunder rolled over the valley. Edward looked toward the cottage light, dim and flickering through the mist. "Let's go home, son." Thomas hesitated only a moment before nodding. When they reached the door, Mary was waiting, her face pale with worry. She rushed forward, pulling Thomas into her arms. "Don't you ever run off like that again," she whispered, voice breaking. "I'm sorry," he said, clutching her. Edward stood quietly behind them, rain dripping from his coat. Mary met his eyes over Thomas's shoulder, the relief and exhaustion in both of them wordless. "Come inside," she said softly. "Both of you." They sat by the fire while Mary made tea. The silence was fragile but calm. Thomas leaned against her arm, his eyes half closed. Edward watched the flames, speaking quietly. "She'll come again," he said. "Margaret won't let it rest." Mary nodded. "I know. She'll try to drag you through the courts to make the gossip truth." "I've lived through worse than gossip," Mary said. "If she wants a fight, she'll have one." Edward looked at her, a flicker of admiration in his tired smile. "You've become stronger than I ever was." "I had to," she said. "For him." Thomas lifted his head. "What will happen now?" "Now?" Mary said. "We go on. We keep the house. We work. We live." Edward nodded. "Together, if you'll let me." Mary studied him, her eyes unreadable. "And if she wins?" "She won't," he said firmly. "I gave up everything she could use against us. There's nothing left for her to take." The fire crackled. The storm outside began to fade, leaving only the steady drip of water from the eaves. "Tomorrow," Mary said, "we'll go to town. I'll speak to the magistrate myself." "You shouldn't have to face them alone," Edward said. She looked at him, a faint smile on her lips. "Then don't let me." He nodded once, the unspoken promise between them stronger than any oath. The next morning the valley was washed clean by rain. When they arrived in town, people turned to stare, whispering as the three of them walked together down the main street, Mary Collins, her son, and the man the village had buried in rumour and pride. Inside the magistrate's office, Mary laid the letter from Lord Blackwood on the desk. "This is the original deed," she said. "His seal, his hand, his confession. It proves my ownership." The magistrate, an older man with weary eyes, studied the paper for a long moment. "This will do," he said finally. "The land's yours, Mrs. Collins. No one can claim otherwise." Edward exhaled, relief plain on his face. The magistrate glanced between them. "And Captain Blackwood," he said, "you've made enemies in this valley, but I've seen worse men than you find redemption. If you mean to stay, do it honestly." "I intend to," Edward said. Outside, the sky was breaking into sunlight. Thomas grinned for the first time in days. "Does that mean we've won?" Mary smiled faintly. "It means we've stopped running." They returned to the cottage as the afternoon warmed. Edward fixed the fence, Thomas chopped wood, and Mary hung clothes to dry. For the first time in years, the house felt whole. As dusk settled, they sat outside watching the last light fade over the valley. Edward turned to Mary. "He's a good boy. He's his father's son," she said quietly. He looked at her, guilt flickering behind his smile. "He deserves better than me. He deserves the truth," she said. "And now he has it." Thomas came running up the hill, waving a folded letter. "A messenger from town gave this to me." Mary took it, frowning at the seal. It wasn't from the manor. The crest was unfamiliar. She opened it, eyes scanning quickly. "What is it?" Edward asked. She handed it to him. "It's from Mr. Price," Edward read aloud, his voice tight. "Miss Whitby has withdrawn all claims to the estate and departed for London permanently. She instructs her solicitor to end all legal disputes. She won't return." Thomas grinned. "Then it's really over." Edward lowered the paper slowly. "Or she's plotting something else." Mary touched his arm. "Let her go, Edward. Some battles aren't worth fighting twice." He nodded, folding the letter. "Then it's over." That night, the air was still. Thomas fell asleep early, and Mary sat by the fire mending one of his shirts. Edward joined her quietly. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'll go to the village. Find work. Something honest." She glanced up. "You? Work?" He smiled. "I'm a fair hand with tools now, and someone's got to earn his place in this house." She met his gaze. "You don't have to prove anything to me." "I do," he said softly. "Not to win you, but to deserve you." Mary set the shirt aside. "You already do." He looked at her for a long moment, the firelight soft on his face. "Mary," he said quietly, "I don't know what comes next, but whatever it is, I want it with you." She held his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then stay." "I will." The silence between them was peaceful for once. No ghosts, no fear, only the sound of the fire and the quiet rhythm of their breathing. Outside, the night deepened. The valley, long haunted by secrets, finally lay still. By morning, the first birds sang again, and sunlight spilled over the hills. Mary woke to the scent of bread baking and the faint sound of laughter from outside. Edward and Thomas were building something in the yard, a new gate, sturdy and straight. She stood at the doorway watching them. Thomas called out, "Mother, look, he actually knows what he's doing." Edward grinned. "Don't let her doubt me, boy." Mary laughed softly. "I'll believe it when it doesn't fall apart." For the first time in years, her laughter felt easy. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Edward walked to her side. "He's growing fast. He's happy," she said. "He should be." Edward's voice grew thoughtful. "He'll have choices we never did. And maybe one day he'll forgive the past completely." Mary nodded. "We all have to, don't we?" He looked at her, a faint smile in his eyes. "Maybe forgiveness is all that's left to learn." She turned toward him, their hands brushing briefly. "And love?" He hesitated, his voice low. "That too." They stood in silence side by side, watching the sun move across the valley, the same valley that had witnessed their youth, their mistakes, their long years apart. And though nothing was said, both knew that the waiting was finally over. Then, just as the afternoon settled into peace, a figure appeared on the road below, riding hard, carrying something that glinted in the sun. Mary shaded her eyes. "Who is that?" Edward squinted. "A messenger, I think." The rider slowed, raising a hand. "Captain Blackwood," he shouted. "Orders from London, urgent!" Edward frowned, stepping forward as the rider dismounted. The man pulled a sealed envelope from his coat, marked with the government crest. Edward broke the seal, scanning the page quickly. His face went still. Mary felt the world tighten again. "What is it?" Edward looked up at her, eyes shadowed. "It's a summons." "A summons?" He nodded slowly. "They're reinstating me. The Navy. They're calling me back." Edward read the letter twice, his face hardening with every line. The seal from London gleamed red against the paper, a cruel reminder of the world that kept calling him away. Mary stood motionless, her hands clenched. "What does it say?" she asked quietly. He looked up, his voice low. "It's an order. They're reinstating me. They want me back to lead a training fleet on the southern coast. They say it's not optional." Thomas came running from the barn. "What's happening?" Mary tried to keep her voice steady. "They want him to return to the Navy." Thomas froze. "They can't take him. He's done enough." Edward folded the letter slowly. "Apparently not." Mary's throat tightened. "And if you refuse?" He met her eyes. "They'll take my freedom, everything I just rebuilt. But if I go, I'll lose you again." The silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Thomas stepped forward. "Then don't go." Edward smiled faintly. If only it were that simple. He turned toward the hills, the wind tugging at his coat. Mary followed him outside. The valley glowed gold in the late afternoon light, the same hills that had once witnessed their goodbyes. 20 years ago," Edward said, "I left because I was ordered to. I thought duty was the same as honor. I thought love could wait." Mary's voice trembled. "And now I know better." He looked at her. "But I also know that a man can't outrun his name forever." She reached for his hand. "Maybe he doesn't have to. Maybe he just needs someone to remind him what it's worth." He smiled, but sadness lingered behind it. "You always make it sound so easy." "It's not," she said. "But neither is losing you again." He exhaled, his shoulders heavy. "They'll expect me in Portsmouth within the week. If I don't go, they'll send soldiers." "Then go," she said suddenly. He turned to her, shocked. "What?" "Go, but come back." "Mary." "No," she said firmly. "I won't watch you run from your past again. If you have to face it, do it. But this time you'll come home to something worth returning to." He took her face in his hands, searching her eyes. "You still believe in that?" "I do." He kissed her forehead, his voice breaking. "You give me too much faith." She smiled faintly. "Someone has to." Thomas approached quietly, holding something behind his back. "Here," he said, handing Edward a small wooden carving shaped like a ship. "I made it. So you won't forget us." Edward's throat tightened. "I could never forget you, son." The boy looked at him, eyes fierce and proud. "Then promise you'll come back." Edward rested a hand on his shoulder. "I swear it." Mary nodded. "Then you'd better keep that promise this time." He smiled through the ache. "You have my word." The next days passed in a blur. Edward repaired what he could around the cottage, making small excuses to stay longer. Mary pretended not to notice, but every hammer strike, every glance carried the weight of goodbye. On the final morning, the valley was still. Mary stood in the doorway as Edward fastened his coat. His horse waited by the gate. "You don't have to come all the way," he said softly. "I will," she said. "I did once before. I'll do it again." Thomas followed them down the road, quiet but resolute. When they reached the bend that opened toward the main road, Edward stopped. "This is where I left you last time," he said. Mary nodded. "Then we'll make it mean something different today." He took her hands. "If I don't return, you will. But if—" "Don't say it." He smiled sadly. "You never did like unfinished promises." She reached up and kissed him. It was slow and certain, a kiss that carried everything they had survived. Years of silence, grief, longing, and forgiveness. When she pulled back, she whispered, "Now go, before I change my mind." He swung into the saddle, looking down at her. Tell Thomas." She cut him off. "You can tell him yourself when you're home." He nodded once, his jaw set, and rode away. Mary stood watching until he disappeared over the ridge. The wind carried the faint echo of hooves, then silence. Days turned into weeks. Letters arrived, short, careful notes written in Edward's firm hand. He spoke of the sea, the men under his command, and his plans to finish his duty quickly. Each letter ended the same way. Hold on to the light. I'm coming home. Winter turned to spring. The valley thawed. The cottage grew full again with life. Thomas's laughter, Mary's quiet songs, the hum of work and waiting. But each sunset left her eyes on the horizon. Then one clear morning a rider appeared on the road. Mary's heart leapt and faltered all at once. She ran to the gate, her apron still in her hands. The man dismounted, smiling, holding out an envelope. Message for Mrs. Collins. Her fingers shook as she took it. She opened it slowly, afraid of what she might find. Mary, the sea is behind me. The work is done. I'll be home before nightfall. Keep the lamp burning. E. She read it twice, tears blurring the ink. Then she turned toward Thomas, who had come running from the yard. He's coming home, Thomas grinned. I'll light the lamp. By sunset, the whole valley seemed to glow. The cottage windows flickered warm against the gathering dusk. Mary stood outside, her shawl pulled tight, her heart racing with every sound on the road. Finally she heard it, the steady rhythm of hooves. She ran forward as the figure appeared at the crest of the hill. Edward dismounted before she could reach him, his face sun-browned, his eyes tired but bright. He dropped his bag and she threw herself into his arms. You kept your promise, she whispered against his chest. I told you I would, he said, holding her tightly. Thomas ran up, breathless. You're really back? Edward pulled him into the embrace. For good this time. The boy grinned. You said that before. Edward laughed. Then hold me to it. They went inside, the fire burning high, the smell of fresh bread filling the air. The house felt whole again. Mary served supper, but none of them ate much. They kept talking instead, Edward telling stories of the sea, Thomas interrupting with questions, Mary just listening, her hand resting on Edward's arm, as if to make sure he wouldn't vanish again. When the fire burned low, Thomas finally yawned. Can I stay up? Mary smiled. Not tonight. He hugged Edward and went upstairs. The room fell quiet. The crackle of the fire was the only sound. Edward reached across the table, taking Mary's hand. You saved me, he said softly. How you saved yourself, she replied. He shook his head. No, I was lost until I found you again. She smiled, her eyes glistening. Then let's never be lost again. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. Mary Collins, he said, voice low. Will you finally marry me? She laughed softly. After all this time. After all this time, he said. No more waiting. No more what-ifs. Just us. Her answer was barely a whisper. Yes. He kissed her, and for the first time it wasn't a promise of what might be. It was what was and always would be. The next morning, the valley woke to the sound of bells. Not church bells, but the bright laughter of people gathered outside the small chapel near the village. Mary wore a simple blue dress. Edward stood beside her in a dark coat that had once been his father's, his eyes fixed on her and nothing else. Thomas stood proudly beside them, holding a single wildflower bouquet. When the magistrate asked if Edward took her hand, he answered without hesitation, With all my heart. And do you, Mary Collins, take this man? I already have, she said, and the laughter that followed filled the little church. When it was done, Edward leaned close and whispered, Now the world can talk all it wants. She smiled. Let it. They'll only tell the story we've already lived. That night, the three of them returned to the cottage. The valley was quiet, the air warm and still. Edward built a fire while Thomas sat nearby, half asleep, smiling without knowing why. Mary lit a single lamp and set it on the windowsill. For the days we spent waiting, she said. Edward slipped an arm around her waist. And for the nights, we'll never spend apart again. She leaned into him, the light flickering across their faces. You finally brought the world home with you. No, he said softly. I left it behind. This is home. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of the river below, steady and calm. Inside, laughter and warmth filled every corner. Mary looked at him, her voice tender. It took 20 years, Edward. He smiled. Then let the next 20 be ours. And as the lamp burned through the night, the valley that had once kept their secrets now held their peace, the light of a love that had waited half a lifetime to begin. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.